Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Mathematical Mother by Universal Totem Orchestra.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
I don't know what it is, but something about the name of this album and the band too, Mathematical Mother, Universal Totem Orchestra, just kinda has me conflicting, both thinking about something very arcane but also something very modern in a way. I don't know, and the two just clash into one another, and it's very interesting in my opinion, but it has nothing to do with the music itself, because of course in order to understand the music itself you have to hear some of my favorite bits from this album. So today we are encountering a pretty wild entry on the list, and it's not wild just because today's album is considered to be Zool, but because it has a very wacky and interesting backstory to it and to the leading and the creation of today's band. Well, technically it does. You see, because today's band doesn't have that weird of a story, but it originates from another band which actually has a pretty wacky backstory to it. So you see, back in the year of 1988, in the Italian town called Riva del Garda formed a band called Ritual Totem. So of course I wanted to start off my research with discovering who were Ritual Totem, so I looked them up on Google and I found their official website, and well, outside of looking like it was designed back in 2001, it gave me some pretty ambiguous descriptions, so I'm gonna read off what was written on the website itself. It says, the history and origin of Runaway Totem are the history and origin of the cosmos. Runaway Totem decided to avow itself in the reality through the universal language that, like the math, can be understood by everyone, the music. And moving on, they also say, Runaway Totem elements exist since ever and will exist forever, both those who already manifested themselves and those that are waiting for their moment to come. Yeah, a pretty cute description by a very normal band if you ask me, but jokes aside, this one really had the same feeling I had when I reviewed Maudlin of the Well and their album Part the Second, in which they kind of described their music as not being something that they personally created, but something that they've just, diluted from another realm and put into musical form on their own. And it's, a very odd statement, but I guess it's just a way of thinking about things. But if we go ahead and come back down to earth and approach things logically, the main premise is that Runaway Totem is and still was an Italian Zool band. And the legacy and activities of Runaway Totem are very much well described in their website, but again in this very odd form of scripture, which I don't know and don't understand, so I kinda just didn't really follow it that much. But the thing is, today we're not talking about Runaway Totem, but we're talking about a band that is an offshoot of theirs called Universal Totem Orchestra. Now, reading the band page on the prog archives of Universal Totem Orchestra, I could gather that these guys were an offshoot of Runaway Totem, but the odd thing is it doesn't mention that anywhere in the Runaway Totem website, nor does it mention it on the Runaway Totem page on the prog archives. And the thing is, I can only go by what I've read, the bit I've seen, that Universal Totem Orchestra actually came from Runaway Totem, but the thing is, I don't even see any correspondence between the people who appear on the Universal Totem Orchestra albums as comparing them to the lineups of Runaway Totem's albums at the time. So yeah, I'm a bit baffled by this entire story, and honestly, if anyone here knows better, I'd love if you leave some, pieces of information down in the comments, because I don't have a lot of ideas about what's going on here. But nevertheless, let's talk about Universal Totem Orchestra, how they've managed to get so popular and how they've managed to even surpass the band from which they grew out of. So Universal Totem Orchestra released their debut album in 1999, and it was released between two Runaway Totem albums, which are considerably not their best in their discography, which already gave Universal Totem Orchestra a bit more of a leverage on its mother band. And their debut album was called Ritual Aliano, and this one featured a very interesting blend of fun compositions as well as some gothic influences, all put together under the classification of Zool. And one of the main things which made it so special was the inclusion of several vocalists, with the lead vocalist being the female singer of Anatoris Frail, which is singing the soprano voice, as well as a myriad of male singers doing the baritones. And this album caught everyone by surprise. You see, back at the time, the Zool genre was kind of losing popularity. It has been a while since it was conceived, and now not a lot of people were really diving into it, so seeing this new and very much exciting addition to the subgenre definitely sparked interest. And well, Universal Totem Orchestra were just starting to ride the wave. They were starting to see a successful career on their own. They got the approval of everyone that their music was good, so of course they did the only natural thing and just went completely radio silent. Not releasing anything, no more singles, no box sets, no nothing, no live albums, completely silent. But then everything changed when 8 years later in 2008 the band came out with their very much unexpected second studio album, this time called The Magus. And this one caught everyone by surprise, and despite the change of sound and the change of lineup only containing one original member being Frail herself, this one was also very much successful. And of course, the band did the only reasonable thing, seeing as they've been able to create 2 consecutive bangers despite going on a very long hiatus, and of course they did the only natural thing and went radio silent yet again. And well, seeing as we are not reviewing nor their first or their second album today, you know that they came back, and of course in a symbolical fashion they waited yet another 8 years up until 2016 to come back with their third studio release, which they've called Mathematical Mother, and that's the album we're reviewing today. And since then, you might not be surprised, radio silence. We don't know what's going on with these guys, honestly, not a lot of information given about them. And if this highly researched graph that I totally didn't draw right now is accurate, we are supposed to see their next release somewhere around 2024, so that's not a long while away. But yeah, that's around about the backstory of UTO. Honestly, a very interesting one, very wacky as I said at the beginning of the video, and now you know why. But how wacky is it? How does it sound like, and what do I think of this album's music? Well, the first and I think most obvious thing that I have to say about this one is that these guys have probably kind of reinvented the meaning of Zool, and maybe to the point where I don't even know if you can actually call this album real Zool. You see, as of today, I have not heard the 2 previous Universal Totem Orchestra albums, so I don't know how Zool-y they might be. But when it comes down to this one is very subtle. It doesn't make the same use of extravagant vocals and instrumentation all over the place just to get the things across, and I don't know really how to define Zool, but it's definitely not what you hear on this one. Honestly, I would give it a lot more credit going in the direction of hard prog, symphonic prog, electronic prog, eclectic, but Zool, just kinda not really there. If I try to actually describe what this sounds like, I'm gonna have to give you some sort of an analogy. So let's take MDK by Magma, and let's say that's like one of the further regions of Zool, you know, the prime example of what Zool is. And then we're gonna take Four Visions by Eschaton, which is still a very Zool-y album, as I said, but in a more subtle sense, and you put those two on this linear graph, and this is Magma, this is Eschaton. Well, personally, I think that we have to go all the way here to the side of the screen in order to find Mathematical Mother. You see, as I said, this album does definitely feature a lot of other realms of prog. The first track on this album, called Terrakava, is very much a symphonic prog song, and it's very much good for what it's worth, and the second song is even more oriented towards the idea of jazz fusion, and this one is called Codas Y16, and honestly, it's a great track, and it would have been my favorite if it not for yet another track which I love to bits, called Arquitectura del Aqua, which without even translating it, I can already say that it means something probably on the lines of architecture of water. And this track, other than being my favorite from the entire album, just kind of cemented the idea that this album really isn't that Zoolish. They might have come from another band which is Zool, and Zool originated, and they might have been Zool at the start with their artistic direction, but honestly for now they've really changed their sound into something much more eclectic, which I personally actually really much enjoyed, although I wouldn't say that this album is perfect and without sin. And maybe sin is a bit of a strong word to use here, but yes, this album is a bit too long for my taste and kind of redundant at some points. I really don't find a reason to be listening to each and every track on here. I would have condensed this album down to something much more enjoyable and more concise in its overall presentation. But as it stands, I don't think that this album is perfect right now, but I also got to know my intuition when it comes to new music that I'm exposed to throughout the year, and well, I do think that this album is one that I'll be coming back to rediscover several times in the future, because I do believe that it holds something very intrinsically interesting within it. So yeah, definitely an interesting album, but if there's something even more interesting about this one, or equally interesting for that matter, is its album cover art. So I really like this album cover. At first I kind of really didn't think much about it, but then I looked at the painting itself and I was like, wow, this is really good and I must know who created this painting. So of course I went on to the Prague archive seeking the name, and it was not mentioned. Fine, okay, no worries, I'll just go to the Bandcamp page of it, and not mentioned as well. Okay, Discogs maybe? No place seemed to want to mention who created this beautiful piece of art. But then I had an idea. I remember seeing the other covers for Universal Totem Orchestra's album, and honestly I thought to myself that they looked kind of similar, so there was a pretty fair chance of it being the same person creating these entire ensemble of covers. So I went ahead and checked, and it was easy enough to find a name. The person who created the other covers for Universal Totem Orchestra was called Danilo Koupa, and well, Danilo Koupa seemed to be the right match, but again I couldn't say for sure if he was the guy I was looking for, so I searched his name up on Google and I found his Facebook page. I opened that Facebook page up and I started looking at it, and well, I saw his second to last post only 6 days ago, and it looked something like this, and the description read that this was an early sketch of Universal Totem Orchestra's album cover art for their album Mathematical Mother, and that's when I knew I was right in my research. And honestly, I love this painting, and now that I actually had Kaupa's Facebook page, I wanted to go ahead and see some of his other work, so I started scrolling, and by God, do I love his art style. It is so freaking good. You guys should go and check it out, because I don't know, it's great. There is some personal connection that I found to it, but that's a different story for a different day. So all in all, this album gets a very respectable rating of 8 out of 10. But yeah, that's about it guys, and are you excited? Because I am very much excited, because tomorrow it will be episode 300, the last really, like round to the 100th point episode on the series, at least for this year. I'm so excited, and for it we'll be reviewing no other album than Even in the Quietest Moments by Supertramp. So yeah, of course I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.